my face now I've sorted it out, and I will share my screen 1 sec. And hopefully you can see my presentation on screen, can you?
We can indeed, sir. Internet regulation and data privacy.
That's right, yeah, exciting stuff. So very loosely going to cover GDPR, CCPA, CPRA, and LGPD, which I'm sure my host can explain what each of those are.
Definitely, yeah, 100%.
Cool. So I've got an ad. So GDPR is General Data Protection Regulation. You can see an article here that's from 2018, and it suggests that already big British firms had sunk 1.1 billion into preparing for GDPR, with American companies accounting for around 7.8 billion. And I think it's safe to say that in the last 2 years, that's ramped up significantly. There's been some really high profile fines recently, which is probably why you see some of our clients have suddenly kicked into gear and are maybe looking to manage cookies or whatever else they're interested in relation to the topic. So I suppose my main point of the figures is that it's really big, a big market, and it's all business transformation market, which is ultimately in digital, and likely our clients or prospective clients who are spending that money, and hopefully we'll have a place in that market. So the same with CCPA, which stands for California Consumer Privacy Act. And again, if you can see here, is saying that it will cost 55 billion to get for companies to get in compliance. That was in 2019, and I think that is again ongoing and will expand significantly. So again, just to sort of cover off the figures, the main point being that these companies are spending billions of pounds cumulatively, across every company, everyone who has a digital presence, or I would imagine every company, there's some implication of GDPR, whether that's for their staff or whatever else it may be. So CPRA stands for California Privacy Rights Act. So CPRA is a recent addition to CCPA. Both of these only apply to residents in California. Currently it's state law, but it's expected that it may become federal law, and in which case the figures that we've seen a minute ago of 55 billion for CCPA will become multiples potentially of that. So, and you can see here with CPRA, I believe the concept was that with CCPA, they very much diluted what they wanted to do in order to pass the bill. And then CPRA being an extension of that, where they've really nailed it down a bit further, saying, for example, telling business not to use categories of sensitive information, including race, health, religion, location, sexual orientation, biometrics. It also makes explicit do not sell. It includes not just selling it, but sharing it with other companies. And whilst that presents a lot of challenges, those challenges need solutions. And I think as a digital agency, it's important that everyone understands where we can help our clients and prospective clients with these challenges. So again, LGPD, I won't attempt to pronounce it, but I think that's effectively GDPR in Brazil. And so you can see, I think, how this is not the end. GDPR was not the end of this regulation. It was very much the start of this regulation, and it's becoming more and more widespread, taking different forms, being extended. And I would say that makes this multi-billion-pound market increasingly larger. So a big concept which I think people will be familiar with is cookies and cookie management, which is really has been a focus of like the initial wave of regulation. There's a very sort of generic matrix here, which sort of shows the difference between first party and third party cookies. I would summarize it as being that First-party cookies are those managed by your own website and the code that's on your own website. Third-party cookies being cookies related to external products or plugins that you may have present on your website. Obviously, first-party cookies are a lot easier for you to manage that data and have visibility of exactly what you're doing with that data because you're responsible for that. In the way that third-party cookies potentially are very difficult at times to know what people are actually doing with that data. Something to kind of emphasize about a cookie is that a cookie on its own is benign. There's nothing that a cookie is doing. It's effectively a notepad that you store in your browser that applications can then reference. So it may be that you've come to the site at some point. In your cookie, we've put a contact ID, which is the concept of the site core analytics cookie. And then when you come back to the site, we're able to check that notepad you've got in your browser and then remember who you are from that contact ID. But on their own, they are doing nothing. It is the code in your website or in third-party tools, which is actually interacting with the cookies and the data that they're storing in them. So to sort of touch upon Sitecore and how they've phrased their own privacy policy, describing roughly what their privacy policy covers. This really is quite standard, and it should be how majority of firms should be approaching their website and other digital platforms. Then more about the product itself, Sitecore explaining how you can disable certain features in Sitecore if that creates a compliance problem for you, and then various other aspects of it. To kind of give a couple of examples of companies who I think are making fortunes from this industry. Zip Comply, you can see in the top right-hand corner here, it's a Canarbos company. Canarbos, I believe, are owned by two Sitecore MVPs. They are a Sitecore agency similar to ourselves, and they are people who know of Jamicam. I think Jamicam is a partner, and Akshay Sura, who runs the unofficial Sitecore training. But you can kind of see here some of the things they claim to offer and the pricing they're trying to cover. $35 per month per domain. That doesn't sound like a lot, but often these companies have multiple domains. And if you've got 10 domains, and that's £350 per month, if you've got hundreds of clients, I think that scales very quickly to being a large revenue stream. For something that I will show in a minute is a very simple concept. OneTrust being another example. I think we've got a couple of clients that are potentially working with OneTrust and their management tool. Other examples of products that OneTrust offer, they kind of try and cover a large suite of different compliance problems, whether that's checking third parties' credentials, various other things that I think are very lucrative markets, but maybe more out of our interest. So there's other certifications, like I think that's something we're interested in, the ISO 27701, which is effectively guidance on how you manage personally identifiable information. You can be certified in this, and I think that's a big part of if people are doing third-party checks. If you can say you're certified, then that checks a lot of boxes without further investigation. Something which Paul circulated recently was how Marriott were hit by an 18.4 million fine, effectively over personal data being hacked. And I think this is a common paradigm which a lot of companies, whether they're verbose about it or whether they keep it in-house, there's becoming increasing pressure and regulation. First of all, making it very costly for them if they're not honest about it, and they try and keep it in-house. But also, just with complying with it, I think this is where this 55 billion, or these extreme figures of what the industry is worth, come to the fore. And I think when you're seeing fines of that nature, more and more clients will be saying, right, we just want to spend significant money to ensure we don't fall into that bracket. Um, I worked with a Magic Circle law firm, and I think all in all they spent about 100,000 just on their website, cookie management, classifying their cookies into different categories, and the whole process of reviewing it with a team of compliance lawyers and then integrating it with the website. They were using a third party like TrustArc, and the total cost, as I say, was around £100,000, which kind of shows how a lot of clients, I think, are getting serious about it and seeing it as a serious investment. Um, and it's also a fundamental requirement for PMs and devs to consider with everything that we do. If for example, the sort of EXO team want a tool put on the site, we have to, as a fundamental requirement, understand that if we're putting a tool like Hotjar on the site, if it's not mentioned in the cookie policy, we have to consider that a fundamental requirement to putting it on the site and factor that into estimates. So, and also feed that back to clients so that they're aware of this. As I say, a tool like Hotjar, we need to explain in the cookie policy exactly what that tool's doing, and really make it the client's responsibility to sign off on that. Because I don't think, as the people implementing these things, you can be responsible for giving the legal advice, for staying up to date with regulation and all of these other things. So, but I do think it's a fundamental requirement for us to feed that back to clients and ensure that it's compliant. So I suppose you kind of a lot of people would question: is it worth it? Is the cost and the impact on the digital industry worth all of this regulation? And the answer to that would be that it's people like ourselves and our personal data, as sort of digital presences collate more and more data about us and store it, then they've got a responsibility to make sure that's secure. And whether that's your bank or whether that's your applications for loans or whatever else that could be, it's sensitive information that companies store about you. And if they're careless with that data in the way that Marriott were accused of being, then potentially it's got ramifications for you as an individual that could cost you tens of thousands of pounds, your livelihood, or whatever else it may be, if on the back of that you were to suffer, whether it be identity fraud or something similar. So that's the end of the presentation. I'm going to jump in and do a quick demo using Rackspace. I hope they don't mind. So what I'm going to try and exhibit here is how you can see with Rackspace, they've got their cookie policy here. They've done a very good example of it. In fact, you can view the required cookies. They've only got Rackspace as their required cookies. You can see information about Rackspace. Sometimes people will talk about what that tool is used for on their site. In this case, it's their own cookies. They've then got functional cookies, which are things that are, as they describe, these are cookies. These cookies allow us to analyze site usage and so on. And I think the key part of being compliant is being very verbose to users of the site or whatever platform this is present on, and being very clear about what a user is opting in or out to, and giving them the option to review all of it, to go and do their research if they're so inclined, and then giving them the option to opt in or out of them. And then you've got advertising cookies, which potentially are generating more data, sending it to third parties, and all of that in theory should be listed here. So you've got the opportunity to decide if you're happy with that and whether or not you don't want that. So I suppose my point that I made earlier about how some of these companies, including the company Zip Comply, made by a couple of Sitecore partners, are making huge sums. You know, the industry, I think it's not just thousands of websites, it's almost every website now is needing to think about this. And like I say, if you're charging $35 a month, 10 domains, $350 a month, times that by a million, and I think it's a lucrative market. But the mechanism they're choosing to do this with is extremely simple, and what you'll see here is if I opt in to the cookies down below here, and in fact I'll just get the cookies first. So you can see here we've got one cookie, and just for anyone not familiar with this interface, this is effectively showing us the cookies that are in my personal browser on this website. You can see here there's only the one cookie on initial page load. They've done a very good job of blocking cookies which aren't you haven't consented to, and they're making sure that the only cookie that's in your browser currently is, and this notice behavior is a trust arc cookie. The value here of expressed EU indicates that we're in the EU, and that's because there's different regulation for different geographic locations. If you're in America, you don't have to consent by default, and so this is telling the application that we're in the EU, so make sure nothing else loads before the user is consented. What should then be the case, if the demo I haven't prepared very well goes ahead. What should be the case is if I press agree and proceed, suddenly all of the JavaScript or whatever else there may be fires, and we get various other cookies. So what you should see here is various cookies, like this notice preferences is saying giving a category of 2, which means that I've accepted all cookies. And they've got a very simple mechanism where it's either using GTM, and for anyone familiar with GTM, it's effectively snippets of HTML as tags in GTM, and you'll have triggers in GTM to say whether or not those tags will fire. And if those triggers are fired, then the HTML will be on the page. So you end up with effectively in GTM blocking triggers for every JavaScript, it may be like a Facebook pixel for tracking, anything that has a cookie. There'll be a blocking trigger in GTM, and when you consent to it, there's a firing trigger which then allows it to fire. And it's a very simple mechanism. As I say, you've just got JavaScript on the site that is related to the cookie banner. When you're clicking accept or you're changing your preferences, it's updating the values in the cookies, and it is as simple as that, just firing those JavaScripts or denying them depending on the preferences. And so there's other mechanisms where you have wrappers in JavaScript. I think Bob's been implementing something similar for OneTrust, and the bizarre part of it is ultimately it's partners for clients who are actually implementing it. They've just formulated a very simple tool that you can put on your site, and the result of that is your partner implements it, and then it manages your cookies, but ever after you're paying this monthly fee ongoing to whether it's TrustArc or another third party. And really I think that a lot can be done at home with very simple mechanisms. So something that I think we're going to discuss internally in the coming months is what our recommendation is to clients, what for different budgets, for different requirements, try and almost formalize exactly what we're recommending, whether or not we can potentially create something in a similar way as Zip Comply have, where it's I wouldn't even say a poor man's version, because the whole concept is a very basic concept. As to whether or not we can provide some kind of services using Sitecore or a JavaScript tool ourselves, and really try and formalize what we're recommending, because I think it will become an ever increasing requirement from clients. an ever-increasing consideration for new things we bring onto the sites, and something I think we all need to be aware of, as I've said previously, being a fundamental requirement. So, as I say, the Google Tag Manager is one route of implementation, which keeps it very simple. I think a lot of the developers would be shocked by the concept, in that you're almost moving a lot of tools which should be natively in your site into something that is managed by a script itself. There's potentially performance implications for websites, in that you've got all of these conditions running on in Google Tag Manager, which all have to be ran before the site loads. So, as I say, I think that simple concept sells because clients think, well, look, that just makes the problem go away for me, um, without really understanding the complexities involved, what's happening, without understanding what a cookie is. And so, something I think as an agency we can continue is trying to sort of create thought leadership pieces on data privacy. I remember seeing, this must have been about a year and a half ago, I saw Paul actually speak at a Sitecore user group, and he was talking about a Speak application that Sagittarius had built, and as an offering that could help clients with this type of problem, and I suppose probably more aimed at back-end data, which is a whole other section to it, to cookie management. So, as I say, that demo gives a very brief outline of cookie consent management tools and the type of mechanism that they use. Obviously, with clients like, whether it be Air Arabia or a host of other clients who use backend APIs and they store that data, that's a whole separate section of it, and a section of it that Marriott have fallen foul of. You know, their problems are nothing to do with cookies. It's where they're storing the data. They've had breaches, and they've not been able to show that they have almost carried out due diligence with how they're storing that data. An example I would give is, I worked with a similar company who had a big booking system, and that it turned out that all of their APIs were open to the public. Anyone who could use a Swagger page to query them, you could get a list of every customer that was in their database. With a little bit of common sense, you could then use those IDs to reference and get information about credit checks. You could get information about their mother's maiden name. You could get information about their address history, and all of this information. And really, now you're looking at huge fines for people who don't spend significant money on it and make sure that they're secure. And I think that presents opportunity for us as a business, in that we can help clients with this. If whether it be, you'll often find that customers may want to manage this in-house. I believe that the likes of Air Arabia, their APIs are managed in-house, and that presents them a problem that we perhaps can't help with. But there's other scenarios where we can directly work with clients, and it's a product and a service we can offer and expand on, and potentially we can even attract new clients just on data privacy and security, and then land and expand with other products. I mean, if you take Zip Comply, the product made by the Sitecore partners, I would recommend them only on the basis that they're Sitecore people and they're part of that community. But I wouldn't recommend them on the basis that I would imagine they follow a similar model, that if they can get Zip Comply on a Sitecore site, they'll probably then be speaking with the customer about other processes, what they're doing with XDB data, and all of these other things. So again, with data outside of cookie consent, Sitecore is a big part of that. All of the analytics that are being generated in Sitecore, if you're looking at, regulation like this CPRA, which is very new, and you're not allowed to use categories of information like location, for example, there may be significant implications for Sitecore, and that's where the right to be forgotten becomes an important part of that, and something we can offer to clients that if someone gets in contact with them, and I think this is part of CCPA, is that if someone gets in contact with them and asks for all of their data, they have to be able to give that person, that individual, their data, and they have to be able to track it down. And I think that creates a big logistical problem for them, and something that, as I say, I hope that we can help with. And I think that's a market that Sitecore are trying to hit, and something that we can piggyback onto and ensure that we're in that space and we're speaking in that space and providing products and services that can solve those problems for clients. So I think that probably about covers it. I had left 10 minutes for questions, which I may as well ask since we've got 10 minutes. I don't know, Andy, if I meant to ask for questions, but if anyone has any.
We're winging this a little bit, Peter, but I guess if anybody has questions, I'm certainly not going to stop anyone from asking them.
Peter, I think you've probably answered what was going to be my question. It was kind of, were you aware of our heritage in this area and the fact that we've been speaking about data privacy for a while, but the fact you saw me probably answers that question.
No, and that's certainly the case, Paul. And it and actually that's something I'm sort of hoping to piggyback onto and expand. But sorry, Paul, carry on.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I mean, obviously Richard and I spent quite a lot of time on this, and he developed the interface you're talking about, which basically enabled us to sort of clean up the mess or delete people or extract what information we had from the sort of older versions of Sitecore, because that wasn't a feature of Sitecore. Well, it is a feature. It became a feature of Sitecore 8, but it wasn't at the time. Sorry, my question was really more around, and this was a conversation that came up yesterday when I was interviewing the guy from Citibank yesterday, was really, it's about trust. So actually, irrelevant of what tech we actually use and how we approach this, it feels like the biggest issue is what the customer understands and what they see, and even the Rackspace one you talk about, you looked at there, it's all sort of too, it's not that user friendly, if you get what I mean. People need to kind of really understand that this brand who I'm engaging with, I trust them, and I kind of I really understand what information they're expecting from me and what the benefit is, etc. So for me, actually sharing data is never an issue if I trust the brand.
Yep. No, I believe that completely, Paul. And it, I suppose a big part of that is how it's implemented, the kind of the wording behind it, the whether it's the styling or whatever else. I think that is key for the users, but I also think that's the case for the clients purchasing these tools, buying into what they're purchasing. If you look at TrustArc, for example, they've got this huge history of being sort of integral with data privacy. And when you come to actually implement the product with them, I'm not sure that same substance is there. And you know, I've had mixed experiences with them. Whilst I love the product and I love the idea, I would question whether the delivery is the same as the illusion they create. But again, it's having that brand and having that trust from clients that they can read all of their portfolio and all of the things they've been part of and buy into that. And as you say, it's the same for website users. And I suppose that's what we need to help clients with, is to convey that message and then put it in place and deliver on that message.
Yeah, the reason I shared that thing the other day was I think that when GDPR was the topic of conversation, everyone was kind of like worried and scared about it and all the rest of it, and it's almost kind of not disappeared exactly, but people have become quite complacent about it. So I think actually, from a sales point of view, sharing stories like that one this week are kind of, hopefully bring people back to mind. Oh shit, yeah, we always need to remember that. And because I think the knock-on implications on us either as an agency of not treating it seriously, let alone what's in it for the brand, are quite serious, really.
No, for sure. And I do believe that even aside from us sharing it with them, I think there's a lot of compliance teams now, as these companies kind of mature digitally. I think compliance is becoming a increasing part of that. And sort of organically, without us saying anything, I think it is going to blow up again. You know, in the same way as maybe a couple of years ago it was a hot topic, with some of these high-profile fines and other regulations coming into place. I've noticed that personally on a lot of projects I've worked on, that it's becoming a big topic again.
I think the big issues, well, one of the major issues, I think it comes up again, and I'm not sure if this one was the case, but certainly some of the ones I've looked at is it's more legacy stuff that people leave lying around.
Yep.
You know, it's actually nothing that's being built at the moment. Really, you'd like to think anyone who's building something at the moment is doing it in a way that's GDPR and secure and all the rest of it. But it's old websites kicking around and databases left, and like you say, APIs left open and stuff like that probably catch people out. So that's where I think we just need to be, is make sure we sort of tidy up after ourselves, even if we even if it wasn't ours in the first place. I mean, we do that when we do our own technical audits, don't we? We kind of look for that kind of thing, but it's the stuff that's it's not even part, if it wasn't part of Sitecore, it's kind of the sources that as soon as we get involved, we almost have a responsibility to make sure everything in the universe we're operating is pretty locked down, because the worst thing that can happen is obviously any sort of data breach doesn't just reflect on the brand, it reflects on the agency that had something to do with it. So if you know, even if it was nothing to do with us, it would still reflect on us.
Can I ask a GDPR
No, for sure.
related
I think
question? Sorry, Pete,
you can, Andy. Just quickly to tie up on that, I think a key part of that is us all knowing that is a fundamental requirement for us. And you know, even if a client's naive, and they're making requirements that go against this, is kind of trying to educate the clients that it's not an optional extra. It's a fundamental part of that. Yeah. Go ahead, Andy. Sorry.
Yeah, I totally appreciate this might not be your wheelhouse, so I don't know is a perfectly acceptable answer. But GDPR was an EU directive, right? Yep. It originally came from the European Union. So now that we've left and officially are next year, where does that leave the UK in terms of needing to comply with the GDPR regulations?
Well, I think, Andy, something that we kind of need to be careful of is making sure that we don't give legal advice to clients, you know, and that we make sure that we kind of know our places implementing it. And I wouldn't be able to say off the top of my head, but what my view is, or what I imagine to be the case, is that I believe that the UK probably plan on keeping EU legislation in the immediate term. And so as a result of that, I think GDPR will apply to us. And then also, if they've got it, it's not necessarily just if your business is operating in the UK. It's if you've got customers in the EU.
Europe. Yeah.
And so even at the point where we kind of renounce GDPR, which I doubt will happen, you know, even at that point, clients who have got any customer base in the EU, it will still be relevant for. And even in that extreme scenario, I imagine the UK would put in similar legislation, which, if anything, would be more extreme. And it's the same with CCPA and CCPR or CPRA, excuse me. They only apply to people in California. And so the rest of America, if I understand correct, it doesn't apply to, but that is state law, and they're very much expecting it to become federal law and to become nationwide in the US. And so that's, as I say, when you've got people estimating 55 billion, and that's even that was 2019, and potentially it's blown up since then. You can look at those figures and think, well, that's a good market, and it's a market that we're in naturally.
Andy, to elaborate on what you said, I don't know if you probably was before your time as well, so I don't know if you know. I sat on board for the Information Commissioner's offices in the UK to advise on the wording of GDPR. Every month I read it for 2 years and fed back. So that's where my knowledge of this comes from. It was something I signed up for as being a member of BEMA. They were looking for someone to represent the digital marketing industry.
They're the most boring 24 months of your life, Paul.
Yeah, it was, but also intriguing and interesting in a sad way. Like, we're all quite sad in the things that we find interesting, I know. But for one thing, so this didn't come from the EU. It came from the European Human Rights Courts. So actually, this was always about our human rights to the ownership of the data that you hold about us. Yeah. So it's about us as a person, really, rather than a law that was really put in place by the EU. They had it as a directive and guidelines to sort of put some structure around that, and then we all had an input into it. So actually, it's always about the person. So it doesn't matter where we are; it's where potentially our customers are that the law applies. So even if we're in it or out it, and that's the same, like you say, with the CPRA one, is it's more a matter of where they are. So if you've got a website anywhere in the world, if someone from California is using your website, you're meant to be abiding to their laws. So there you go.
Because I remember just a little bit before GDPR came in, there was that big fine handed out for somebody. It was a company in the United States who was targeting an individual in Spain, and that individual then took them to court over it for them storing information on them. And the company in the States was found liable and were fined quite heavily for it. I can't remember the exact value, but it was multiple millions.
Yeah, I think the company was Facebook, wasn't it? I think it was somebody like that. I think Facebook was behaving in a bad way in Spain or whatever, or a way that's contravening their laws.
Yeah. But that was an American company, not situated in Spain, but they were still quite heavily fined for it. So.
Oh, and I suppose that just goes to show, doesn't it, how it is worldwide, and it's every client of ours will be affected by it.
Yeah. But I also think it's one of those things that you get a lot of companies, especially in the States, who think that, oh no, this is a European problem, and they'll continue to think it's a European problem until they get fined.
And I think also, I think Bob will sort of testify for this, that a lot of clients just want it to go away, and they don't want to actually understand it. They don't want really to be educated about it. They want to say, are we compliant? Yes or no. And they kind of are willing to pay a lot of money to get the answer of yes, rather than yes, but, and then have to do something.
Well, I think that's the interesting one about brakes, is that they're blindly implementing stuff.
Yep.
But whether that stuff that they're blindly implementing actually resolves the problem or not is something else again.
For sure. And in fact, I've inherited a few sites where they've clearly not been compliant, but the agency working on it have said, yes, they're compliant. And in a perverse kind of way, some of these marketers are happy with that. They'd rather, it's like on brakes, you get the feeling that sort of everyone wants Bob to just say, yeah, it's compliant, even if it's not. And, the hard part is actually pushing back and saying to them, no, it's going to take longer because of this complication, and you need to think about it, and you need to do something. Cool. So any other questions?
There's obviously only so many of us on this call at the moment, Peter. What should we be doing about this information? What should we be doing? It feels like you were making some recommendations, really, in terms of what products should be being bought or what we should be selling to people, but I'm not even sure actually if there's anybody from client services on this call.
Well, I kind of think that thought leadership is a big part of it, and I think it would be good if we maybe generated some content that was probably very prudent, maybe not committal about too much legal advice, but maybe talking about some of the solutions that we offer, and then also educating, whether it's client services, devs or PMs, on really what our responsibility is on the topic, and then where we can cross-sell services.
I mean, historically, we would create content or presentations that are sort of outward facing, if you like, really, like you've seen the sort of stuff that I've done in the past, but then it becomes an asset that the client services can also use, if they're trying to sort of educate their clients, say, well, look, my head of technology or has just done this, this might be interesting to you, that kind of thing, really. So yeah, it's always good for us to do thought leadership. Like you say, we're not lawyers. If you ever watched any of mine, I'll probably put a caveat screen up at the beginning. None of ours, nothing I'm about to say could be considered legal advice.
No, and that's the important part, isn't it? But I suppose it's getting that credibility that if you are having problems with this topic, that we're a good partner to work with. And, along with the legal advice you're getting, we can give you solutions to implement that legal advice. And I suppose something that's an extreme option is, in the way that Jamicam and Akshay Sura have done, is they've created their own tool, which is very simple in the same way as TrustArc's tool is, and perhaps selling it as a poor man's version of it. And I think that if we ever went down that road, would need a lot of internal discussion and a lot of kind of buy-in from a board level, because there'd be a lot of risk potentially involved in that. But it's just interesting that, two Sitecore guys have made their own product, and I'm sure they've got a good platform to sell it to their own clients. And I'd say it's probably more effective than the likes of TrustArc and these other big names, even if the credibility and the portfolio isn't the same. But I think also what's important is that we actually know what we're recommending. I think it's a common thing that clients are going to bring to us more and more frequently. And if you ask me right now what I was recommending, I'm not sure I'd be 100% what I'd recommend. And so I think internally, maybe we need to discuss for different budgets what our and requirements, exactly what we'd recommend. And then, like you say, client services can immediately tap into that and give an indication without too much effort.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is a conversation for another time, but when it comes to the agency recommending or bringing partners, if you like, to work with, we always have to kind of look at, not only is it a good product, but are they actually a good partner for us to be associated with? And just as like we have a partnership with Sitecore, it's kind of, well, what is that really a partnership, or are we just reselling their product, or actually is somebody who's going to push us as one of their preferred suppliers and stuff like that? So sometimes that has to should be sort of considered along the way, really, rather than just being a technology choice.
No, and that makes complete sense, because again, using TrustArc as an example, I've seen multiple occasions where their delivery team is so bad that they've given the wrong documentation to the partner. It's been implemented completely, and then at the end of the whole process, they've said, "Oh, the reason it's not working properly is you've got the wrong documentation." And as a partner, you've then got to do the whole thing again, and you suddenly think, is this making us look good, or is the client happy with this, what we've recommended? And so I suppose there's risk all around.
So with this cookie piece particularly, you saying that really every one of our clients, we should be doing some sort of review audit?
That is exactly what I'm saying. And I think in the majority of cases, we probably don't even need to recommend it. I would imagine that a lot of them are already thinking about it. But if
count on it.
No, but you're totally right. If they're not, it is something that we perhaps should be raising.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's a client service. Client services are always looking for stuff to sell as well, really. And actually, things like this then almost potentially come out of different budgets. It's not even something that they have to find out of their marketing budget. So if you can productize it and say, look, this is the thing, this is the steps we'd go through, and this is the range of costs, then the sales guys would love it.
No, and in fairness, that's why it was my one of my favorite projects to work on, this Magic Circle law firm, is they had a blank check because it was so important to them because they were advising clients on it. They had a blank check, but it wasn't out of the marketing budget, and it didn't affect any other work stream. It was just, can you do this on top of it? And you've got a blank check as long as you do it very, very well, which can't be bad.
Yeah, no, I'd like it. It's good content for us to have as well, particularly as we start to launch our credibility in the sort of ISO stuff as well. So it all kind of backs that up.
Nice.
Thanks, Peter.
Cool. Any more then?
So Andy, as it's Hutton hosts, where's you know, what was your view?
Some teething problems initially. We will iron them out in the weeks to come, but very informative. Thank you ever so much for that, Peter. I learned a lot about things today that I didn't even know existed. So well done for that. And just for stepping up to the plate, man. You've only been here a couple of weeks. Look at you.
No problem. I did intend to put a lot more effort into preparation, but I'm not going to make excuses. Thank you.
Pull him up on the lack of animated GIFs.
I know.
Yeah, no, we will. It has been noted and will be brought up in his next one.
No problem. My next one will be better.
Mate, you smashed it. Absolutely brilliant, Peter. Thank you ever so much, man. Really appreciate it.
Cool. No, well, thanks for everyone's time.
Cheers, bud.
Claire,
Cheers.
if you want to stay on and we'll figure out the Zoom problems that we had. Claire?
Bye.
Bye. Claire? Hello?